Before the Feast of Christ the King was placed where it is now in the current calendar, this last Sunday, that is this Sunday of the year, the Gospel was what we have here, perfectly chiseled and chosen for a conclusion to a liturgical year. We are placed, as indeed we would be with the context of Christ the King and therefore Judge, in the last times, our end, therefore. Now, this Gospel is operating on two levels. There is the immediate destruction of Jerusalem, which happened, as you know, in two waves. The first one was around 70 AD, but then there was a complete one nearly a century later, and Jerusalem then was completely devastated, and the temple area was made into a place of pagan worship, hence the abomination of desolation, which is referred to in this Gospel. But then an attentive reading of this Gospel indicates that there is also another level, when all the elements of the cosmos come into play, the end of time as we know it. Now, when we die, we come into that other realm of a different scale of time and an ending of all that we know. Therefore, when it comes to whether we think of that as the judgment or that of the last day when all the bodies will arise as well, it doesn't make all that much difference, because the point is, once we're there, it's the same. It's fixation in the last moment of our existence. From that point on, there is no more change. Our eternal destiny is decided in one point in time, the intersection between time and eternity, death. Having said that, it is still quite clear that there is a distinction between what happens in our case, at our death, what has, and is still called actually in the Catechism, the particular judgment, and then the last day when all shall see everything, the last judgment. And the reason why that separation and distinction logically should be there is that we do not sin or merit alone. We do things that have ripple effects. We too can be responsible for the salvation or damnation of someone else. And it is only just that the reason why people have got to where they are in the beyond and in their judgment should actually be known by others. Hence there will be a certain, as it were, publication on the last day. We'll see what actually really happened and why. Now, when we're going through life, one day can change all eternity for somebody by things happening through these ripple effects. One day in Italy, I had been invited to the big feast of one of the monasteries near us, the mother house of the Olivet and Benedictines, probably the feast of St. Benedict in midsummer. And there I was talking to a Vincentian father, a very good young priest. And we happened to discuss something which he was hesitant that I should ever use. So, with that in mind, I repeat cautiously what he said to me. You'll see why in the end. It was this. There was a case, and I forget the details of all this, but it went something like this, of something which had ended up in Italy, and I think he knew more about where it was than I did. It had come discreetly all the way from France, Paris, I think. What had happened was this. Something had to be hushed, kept quiet, so they got it out of the way as far as possible. It was this lady who had a lover Now, she was already married, but this affair was going on. Now, the details of her death I forget. But the point is, and it's quite clear, that she did not die having made her peace with her Maker. Possibly, because presumably she had the faith in those days, it was a sudden death. Anyway, this young man, who was not a bad man, but he was taken by passion, which, as you know, obnubilates the reason, was one day alone. And what happened? Before his eyes appeared this, his lover, in flames. And she said to him from the beyond, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here," and disappeared. But it didn't stop there. She had time to lay her hand on, actually I think it was a prie-dieu. He must have been saying his prayers. He must have been upset by the death of this lady. And the burn, the scorch, the hole is there to this day. Frightening. So they had to get it out of the way in case this bit of news got out, because they might trace it to who had actually been involved in the beyond. So there it was, carried discreetly miles and miles away to Italy, where it still is. When somebody in the studio of RTE in Dublin 4 decides to put on something indecent, he could be actually having a ripple effect of that nature. Our acts are not just our own. In reverse, words can be hugely influential. When in school, at the age of 12, a friend who lived in the same street befriended me and dropped hints that it'd be a good idea if I started to go to what he went to. It was a weekly Bible study in school. And I did start to go. And there, because they were so much involved with authentic prayer and sincerity, I discovered a living relationship with the Lord Jesus, which was only there embryonically. It was there, but it wasn't quite, if you like, energized as they had it, and it had a huge effect. We used to have what we called this weekly Christian fellowship. That word fellowship is an old English word, which is actually very comforting. We have soul friends on the journey. We share what is precious to us. We are not isolated in our bubble, our solitude, our desert isle as we go through the cosmos. We have someone who cares. What happens if you find friends who have in common echoes of the other world? I mean, joy in shared sin. They have an apparent joy, do they not? A froth and effervescence of bubbliness, levity, giggling and laughing. But is there joy? Is there fellowship? Bring that to a marriage situation. People who in their youth caught another person for the wrong reason end up, after the first thrill has gone, in a marriage where there's no more depth to share, only the periphery. And one observes a marriage without fellowship, a juxtaposition of bodies. One might say to oneself, and people have said this over the past generations, well, if I end up in hell, I'll have you with me. Actually, it's not quite like that. Do you know that to get to the other side, not in a state of grace, is complete isolation of the most absolute kind. Do you know that even the demons are isolated in their torment? Only grace binds souls together in depth and keeps them together, actually forever. One day in Rome, we were talking about this issue, and this came out of nowhere. There was a case of exorcism which went something like this. The exorcist, presumably in Rome, might have been Gabriel Amort, the main one, I don't know, was commanding the demons to all go together where they belonged, out of this soul into the underworld. And their reply in one concert was, "We are never together." That apparently down there, they're all alone in their loss. This hit me. To lose one's soul is to be condemned forever to solitude, not to have anyone joyful around with whom one can share any note of joy. Bad company, without a break and without end. Do you see why this last Sunday of the liturgical year is a big event? It's an invitation to think about what and only what matters. Because right now, as we meditate and prepare to meet our God at the altar, we don't know how many or what proportion, but we do know that there are souls in that state, somewhere beyond our geography, in a state of utter and complete solitude, even though they're millions, perhaps billions, perhaps trillions together, all alone in a bubble of deep, profound failure, forever. Now, this, my friends, is never said. You know why, don't you? If it were said, it wouldn't be filled. But we know from other exorcisms that precisely this is Old Nick's great game. Make sure that this is never said. I put that in sonnet form way back in student days, but there's another thing too. It's where they're going to if they don't make it. Who made it? Apparently, and it's actually from the Gospel, we know it, it wasn't there at the beginning. Only bliss, only joy. There was in the cosmos only good and light and peace. But somewhere in pre-cosmic history, one moment came, if we can call it a moment, because we don't know how time works without movement, when amongst these brilliant beings that we call angels, some failed a test. Therefore, there was at one moment in time a huge jarring note which came into the cosmos. Something went wrong. And it would seem, from those who have intuitions in the mystic field, that what happened was this. Their leader, whom we call Old Nick, didn't really think that God could possibly ever have in his universe anything but goodness and light and warmth. Therefore he would have a kingdom and get away with it. At that point, came into existence, we don't know quite how, but the only logical consequence of that rebellion from the authority of the great king. There had to be, therefore, somewhere where this garbage could go from the sight of the All-Holy. As the Lord said in the Gospel, in a Gospel read sometimes on this day in the new calendar, the great king on his throne says to them, to the lost souls on his left, go to that place, prepared what? for the devil and his angels. It was their home. He did not have any intention that any other bit of garbage should end up there. But down the line of centuries, we come along the track. We too have our test. We too can say no to the great king, but we too are faced with the consequences. My friends, it's only logical. We can't turn our back on the will that made us and get away with it. We can, with the patience of God, only in time, but not eternity. So it would seem that the demons also had something to say on this. In a way, they made it. So my friends, let's finish there, this liturgical year, remembering that no matter how much noise comes out of the goggle box, how much swearing comes out of people's mouths, how much disobedience with a big grin, the smile of reason as it was called in the age of the Illumination, Voltaire and all them, God is patiently waiting for the last word. Not as an avenging judge, but as the one who's doing his level best to rescue every bit of potential glory from damning themselves, not actually in any way being thrown there by avenging God, but precisely because those who can't see him have to go somewhere, and therefore will go as far as possible. Alone, with no one to talk to but their own unhappy interior. But remember, my friends, we're on the winning side. So we have the right, and only we, to joy, true joy, even in the midst of woe and sorrow. For we are, as I say, the winning team.
Exorcism. There is somewhere a pain beyond the world of sense, where none returns to share a thought of ghostliness untold. Yet, in this word of eloquence demonic, quite unsought, but given twixt grinding teeth, I see a sound of raging incandescent, where there is no more a moment's cooling to be found, or company, but fellowship all his. Together go, together none may be. Go thither with a God prepared a place. No God made this, created it have we, and for much loneliness there is much space. And there are some that burn as I read on, and on, and on beamed glories gone.